Hi, everybody. My name is Manan Puri, and I'm the co-founder of Strategy for GMAT. In today's edition of Musings, the B School journey of alums from top B schools, today I have with me Nitesh Kumar, who's an Insead alum. So thank you, Nitesh, for taking out time and speaking to us. Why don't you start
Pleasure.
off with your introduction?
Sure. So Nitesh Kumar, as Manan put it, went Insead, but to give you guys a bit more context on what my journey has been like, moved to the US for the first time in 2010 for my master's in economics. Um, got my undergraduate degree at the University of Delhi, again in economics. Moved here in 2010, went to Maryland, got my graduate degree in economics. 2012, I moved back to India for a hot bit. I was working for an economic policy think tank called the Indian Council for Research in International Economic Relations, which I know is a bit of a mouthful. But I worked with them for about 4 or 5 months, co-authoring a paper that was studying the impacts of FDI on the Indian economy. It was sponsored by the American Chamber of Commerce, who were trying to influence policy at that point. So did some research for them. Soon after, I got a job with a company which was at that time called the Corporate Executive Board, or CEB, which was acquired by Gartner in 2016. Started working on their research team for chief audit executives and chief risk officers. About a year into my tenure, I was asked to relocate to their headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, and jumped on that opportunity, moved back to the States in 2014. Spent about 4.5 years after that working in that role, rose through the ranks. And when I was at a research consultant position, which is kind of mid-level management, I'd say. And not to sound too arrogant, but I think I got very good at my job, and it just started coming pretty easy. So I was on the search for my next challenge and trying to shake things up a little bit. Decided to apply to business school for a bunch of reasons, which I think we might get into soon. But applied to a few schools, mostly here in the US. The only non-US school that I applied to was Insead, and got through Insead, and that had been my top choice from day one since starting. And after that, I was like, all right, let's back up and move for a year. Immediately after, got a job in management consulting and strategy consulting with a company called LEK over here in Chicago. So after graduation last year in 2019, started working with LEK. Did that for about a year, and 4 or 5 weeks ago, decided to leave my position and look for things outside of consulting. But yeah, that's been my journey so far.
Thank you, Nitesh. So yeah, as you said, let's get on to the reasons why you decided to go for an MBA and a business school in the US and obviously outside of US, which was just one. So talk
Yeah.
us through that.
Yeah, so I'll talk about why an MBA first, and then probably answer your question about why Insead or why it was the only choice outside of the US. The why MBA question, I am still trying to figure out what the answer is. I'm going to be very honest. It in the moment. So there's a bunch of things. There's one is how your career has trended up until the point where you decide whether or not you want to go to business school, whatever that point in your career is. And a couple of different things that influenced my decision were, given the skills that I've built, what are the things that I can do for the rest of my career? I was in a very comfortable position at Gartner, but that also made me feel that that's not somewhere where I wanted to be in the long run. I always enjoyed being slightly outside of my comfort zone, and when things start coming super easy to you, you realize that maybe this is not the right place for me. Maybe I need to change things up a little bit. An MBA is a way for you to change your sectors, to change your industry, to change the kind of role that you're playing. For good or for bad, my experience was that if you've been doing something for 5 or 6 years, you do get stereotyped into that particular role when you start looking outside of that company. And it's very, very hard for you to change industries or for you to like make a jump from, let's say, what I was doing, which was research and advisory, to something that I want to do, which is corporate strategy, right? You have to have some sort of experience working in corporate strategy or in similar roles, whether it's consulting, like typical management and strategy consulting, if you want to get to those roles. The other option for you is go to business school and pick up a set of transferable skills. Get that stamp of approval from a very good business school that tells people, hey, this guy is smart. He can work his way around problems, and that's one of the reasons why maybe you should consider him. For all said and done, like I loved a lot of things about business school, but in my mind, at least, that is essentially what business school does to you more than anything else. Is it's a rigorous process that employers look at, and they're like, all right, instead of us betting like 1,000 people who are going to come to us, we're going to let the business school do it instead. You'll have to go through the GMAT, you'll have to go through the essays, the interviews, and then obviously once you get to business school, you do develop your personality by talking to a lot of people from all different walks of life, right? So that was, for me, the primary incentive was find myself in a position where I can make those leaps and I can make those changes in my career trajectory, and have more options available to me than I would have if I would have been searching for a job immediately outside of Gartner, right? Having left that, and probably having gone into something which was very similar, like research heavy, looking at like business problems, but not from a higher macro lens, which is something that I was keen on doing. The other reason is pretty basic. I wanted a break. It had been 4 or 5 years of nonstop work. I know now, having thought of it, that it's not something that was as rigorous that might have required a break, but it still is a cool experience to have, especially when you're at that inflection point where you're trying to figure out what it is that I want to do. I'm a huge proponent of having people take some time, think about what it is that they value, think about things that really matter to them, and what they want to do in their lives. Not all of us can do that when we are working full time, and you've got your social agenda and all of that. But I think getting an MBA put me into an environment where I met people who had done some very, very incredible things in their lives, and including some of the coursework as well, which I think we can talk about if you so want, where they force you to like kind of ask yourself the question of, is this what I want to do? Is this where I want to be? What matters to me? What are the skills? What are the things? What are the opportunities that really align with my value set? And getting to learn some of those things from some of the smartest people who've done a lot of really impressive things in their lives was another really key incentive for me. So no one burning bridge, no one really driving force or factor that drove me to business school. But I just say for the most part, just a combination of a few different factors.
Right, right. I think in a business school, one of the biggest experiences is a humbling one where you meet a
Yeah.
sort of people who have done equally or if not more brilliantly well in their lives, and are at the same place. You
Yeah.
thought that you were good enough, but here they are who are like 10 times better than you in terms of experiences, etc., etc. So it's a very humbling experience in general. So, how did you actually prepare for your applications and the interview, especially Insead, which is known to be a very rigorous process, getting in number of essays and the kind of personality traits they test out, etc., etc.
My first step will always be to talk to alumni. That's something that I've learned over the years that was not part of my psyche. Like when I was applying to my master's programs or anything, it was always like, oh, which are the best schools? And I want that stamp on my CV, right? Um, the more I spend time, working and getting to learn a lot about myself, step number one is the school is not the only one that's accepting you are accepting the school as well, right? So I think that is a key mindset to have when you are even thinking about step one, which is shortlisting the schools, right? Talk to a lot of alumni, got to understand what it is that the school really values, what is the ethos of a school, and how will that contribute to what I am looking to get out of this entire experience, right? So that is step one: is speaking with a bunch of alumni and understanding more things about the school, like what it is, what it has to offer, and coming up with a list of your preferred like 4 or 5 schools. I would not recommend going for more than that. I was very ambitious, but it just doesn't work out very well if you're going for 10 schools. Once it comes to the actual essays, honestly, I decided to do it myself. I have a few key people in my life close friends, close family who know me better than I guess I know myself. And it was a lot of conversations with them to try and discover things about myself that I probably haven't spent enough time thinking about. Because at the end of the day, what you have to realize is that all that a business school is looking for is your personality, right? In your essays, they're looking for the work you've done before, right? Are you impressive in a professional setting? Have you achieved more than your peers have who are also applying to this particular role? But along with that, they're also looking for a personality fit. Most of the business schools are, which is what I learned from my interactions with the alumni. They want to see how well you fit within what the school has to offer and the ethos of the school. And really, once you figure that out, and once you start aligning your personality with what it is that the school is looking for, if there's that alignment, then the process becomes easy. For me, the key part was learning about the schools themselves, which came from alumni, which came from a bunch of other organizations like Poets and Quants is one that I refer to pretty significantly. I'm sure you've heard of them. The essays were written by myself. They were looked over by my friends who had already been to business school to make sure that I was presenting myself in my best light. And marketing and advertising of yourself just assumes a completely different role in that space when you start doing that. But outside of that, Insead was rigorous. It had like 7 essay questions as compared to some other places which have maybe 1 or 2. So it was hard writing the Insead essays. It required a lot of introspection on my part to think about the last 7 or 8 years of my life, think about the key moments, think about like what I learned, what were the things that all of those moments added to my life, and why I feel like I'm a good fit for Insead, and why is Insead a good fit for me. Fortunately for me, that was the first school in terms of deadlines. The essays were due in November, so I had some time to actually think about it, think about the stories, think about the instances that I wanted to tell people about at Insead, which made my life subsequently when I was applying to the US schools a lot easier because I had all of those stories, all of those frameworks already built out. But there's no easy way around it. There's no shortcut that I can tell you. There's no magic bullet. It just takes time. It takes you knowing yourself. It takes getting to talk to people and making sure that this is the right school for you and that you are presenting yourself in an accurate, in an honest, but also in a favorable light, which I think is the bigger challenge for at least me and maybe for some other people who I spoke with as well.
Yeah, I think it sometimes gets difficult to blow your own trumpet, and hence you need people who've been there, done that, to look it over, amp things up a bit, and obviously
Yeah,
provide feedback.
my
Yeah,
mind was always like full of fear. Like I don't want to be embellishing. I don't know if I've done anything that's
correct.
super cool. That was my mindset. But you know, like you mentioned, it's the people around you who are like, that's really impressive. Why don't you build this up even more? Like why are you being so coy about this particular aspect? And it's really just that, like getting out of your shell and having confidence and having a sense of pride in everything that you've achieved so far, because you are a super successful person if you're thinking about applying to like Insead or Harvard or any of the top business schools. So just be true to that.
Correct. Thanks for that. Talking about your experience at INSEAD, how has that impacted your career since you graduated in terms of the choices that you've made? One, obviously getting into consulting, as you mentioned, now looking out. So, how has that impacted your choices in some sense? One, obviously, is that you can take certain bold decisions that you were not probably taking earlier because you have a brand associated with it.
Yeah.
In terms of the other factors, what would those be?
I mean, it, so the biggest thing that I would say Insead has helped is getting me into consulting. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was get to know what the school is like, right? Get to know what the school specializes in. One of the things I knew about INSEAD before I went there, it is a core consulting school, right? Similar to maybe Kellogg here in the US or Booth in the US, which are core consulting schools. If you think about Wharton or Columbia, they're finance schools, right? If you want to go to Wall Street, those are great options for you. So in terms of your career, the tone is already set before you get to a business school. The tone should be set when you're looking at different business schools. You should know what their USPs are and what are the industries that they cater to most often. Choosing INSEAD meant that I was going to be like predisposed to getting into consulting anyway, and I knew that going in. Once you get into the school, you obviously meet a lot of people who come from all different walks of life, right? So that's step 2. Is getting to learn about different people's experiences, getting to learn about different roles that exist out there. INSEAD, I think, at least in my view, I'm going to be slightly biased, but INSEAD offers a very diverse pool of students, of classmates, of people who you meet and hang out with every single day, just because it is focused on making sure that it's diverse, from the overall class size to even the groups that you're put into for the first 4 months. They curate those groups specifically based on your personality types, your previous experiences. So the point I'm trying to make is that you get to learn a lot about different kinds of roles that you probably hadn't even thought about before you went to business school, right? When you're doing something and clicking away for 5.5 years, you don't really have the time to explore what else is out there. What would it be like being part of a startup, right? And you start learning more things about all those different roles, which helps you kind of figure out, okay, so I came in here knowing that I wanted to go into consulting, but having spoken with all of these people about all of the cool things that they've done, is that still something that I really want to do, right? So that's the next inflection point when you get to INSEAD. Then, of course, you've got your recruitment cycles, which are, again, like very heavily geared towards consulting, which shouldn't come as a surprise. But I think the work on my part, especially, really started after I started working in consulting and thinking about going back to everything that I'd learned at INSEAD and thinking about whether or not this is the best way for me to apply my skills and apply everything that I learned, not just at INSEAD, but in the years before that as well. So the way it's influenced my career so far in the most tangible way is giving me a sense of I don't want to say dissatisfaction, but constantly looking for something better. Do you know what I mean? Is not allowing myself to settle for something that I'm not very happy with, where I don't feel like I'm making as much of an impact as I would like, or in the areas that I would like to do it in, which is a mentality that I picked up from primarily like my classmates and hearing their experiences and knowing that people in their lives don't settle, right? And I, having gone through that experience, know that I don't want to do that either. Of course, after that, as you mentioned, having the brand name INSEAD on your CV does count for a lot. Like I mentioned, quit my job a few weeks ago, and it's been a search for the next best thing, right? What do I really want to do? What would allow me to feel like I'm adding value, making an impact, while still being like a good fit with the skills that I bring to the table, right? And that's where talking to people on LinkedIn has definitely helped. The US probably is not as extensive in terms of an INSEAD alumni base as Europe probably is, but I found the INSEAD alumni community to be very, very responsive, reaching out to them, speaking with them, and you'll see that they're doing all kinds of things. But in addition to that, having an MBA from a top tier business school like INSEAD, even if you are reaching out to like non-INSEAD alums, is more likely to get you a 30-minute call with people. What you do after that, again, like use your skills, use your intelligence to have an engaging conversation for 30 minutes, which again, INSEAD has prepared you for, because you're meeting 600 people for the first time from all across the globe and you're supposed to like chat with them, right? It's opened doors for me, which I don't think would happen without an MBA, and definitely not without an MBA from a top tier business school. So I'm learning a lot more about different kinds of opportunities. I'm having great conversations in the last like 4 weeks. And I think all of that, for the most part, can be attributed to business school and to INSEAD. The next opportunity I get, whatever that may be, a lot of it will be attributed to the things I learned in school, the things that I've been doing after school, working with the alumni community and engaging with people on LinkedIn. So very, very, very major role in my professional career since.
Right, right. So, just to wrap up, any tips for B school aspirants who have consulting as a post MBA goal as they prepare for their applications and interviews? You've touched upon it already. Also, do you think moving into consulting or continuing into consulting, uh, is an MBA from a top tier B school a must-have, a necessary step, or can it be done without as well?
It can be done without an MBA from a top tier business school, but it is going to be really fucking hard if you want to do it. I think that's the one thing that I want to tell people. Even with a lot of my friends from business school who did not have consulting experience before, it was hard to get into consulting even while you were at Insead, which is a corporate consulting school. It's hard. The way I think about it is that there's a few inflection points in everyone's career. The first one being when you graduate from college, right? When you're 21, 22, if you want to get into consulting, that is a very good time because you're like raw, you're straight out of school, and that's usually typically the first way for people to get into consulting and then keep growing within the world of consulting, whether you start from associate or like whatever the titles are in that firm, but associate, consultant, manager, principal, partner, whatever, like you follow the normal trajectory. If you don't do that, it's harder for you to get into consulting. At the age of like 27, 28, let's say you've been working in like advertising or marketing, no disrespect to either of them. I think they're really cool professions. But if we think about like the transferability of those skills and to move into a consultant role is much harder. Even for me working in professional services before, if I'd have thought about moving into strategy consulting right after I quit Gartner, I know that it probably wouldn't have happened given my conversations with people, right? You can move into consulting without an MBA, but the only times I've seen that happen, and again, this is just my experience, and it's very anecdotal, is when you have become an industry expert in whatever industry that you're working in. So let's say you worked in tech for 20 years, 25 years, right? And you are the CTO of some company, and you've got the industry contacts. Makes it easier for you to get into a consulting firm as a partner. But the other inflection point then becomes an MBA. If you haven't been in consulting, you're 27, you're 28, you want to move into consulting, getting a business school degree is again the best way for you to make that leap. For some of the reasons that I mentioned before, is like the business school validating you as a potential candidate for consulting. So I would say if you are serious about consulting, if you do want to move into management and strategy consulting, and you haven't had that experience in the last whatever 5 or 6 years of your professional life, an MBA is not a guarantee, but it is probably the easiest way for you to make that switch. So I would say that is definitely something that people should consider if they're moving into consulting. And the other thing that I would say, think about why you want to move into consulting. Whenever I speak with anyone from Insead right now, like it's great that you want to move into consulting, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Make sure that you are aware of the realities of like strategy consulting before you decide to move into it. It sounds very sexy, and it is very sexy, but be sure after having conversations, make a well-informed decision. To answer your other question about tips, man, the most basic thing I'll say, a couple of things. One, make sure that you're finding the right school for yourself. There's a tendency, at least there was in me, and I'm sure it is in a lot of other people as well, is brand names, right? When you think about business school, and that's 100% valid. You do want to go for a solid brand name if you're going for an MBA. You're making a giant investment, and this is going to be on your CV for the rest of your life. So make sure that it is a very good school if that's what your top criteria is. But even within brand names, like my strategy was just to like start shooting on the wall. Like it was all over the place, without any coherent strategy about, okay, what do I want to do afterwards, right? That's the process of discovery that I had to go through. But know what schools will get you what you want to do after business school. I think that is very, very important. Speak with alumni, know where the synergies are between your experience, your personality, and what the school is looking for. Be as selective about the schools that you choose as the schools will be about the candidates that they choose. It's a two-way street. You are judging them, you're evaluating schools as well, and it's not always a one-way street where the school is doing that for you. So be picky, be choosy, be clear about what you want to do after you're graduating from business school, because you'll find once you've found the right schools, the process of writing those essays is much easier because there is alignment between what you've done, what you want to do, and what the school can offer you, right? So that would be key. And then the second thing is have a trusted source who looks over your essays, right? Whether it's you through your company, whether it's your friends or family, or someone who you really trust, and who can add value, like who has that skill set as well. But it is important, no matter how how good or how well we think we know ourselves. Like I mentioned earlier, like you were saying as well, it's hard to accurately sometimes portray our achievements in a favorable light, just because we are often more critical of ourselves. Maybe this wasn't that big an achievement. People must do this all the time. Yeah, they might, but that's not a reason why you shouldn't be proud of your achievements. And I feel like a second or third party who you speak with, who you talk to about your achievements, can more accurately help you portray those achievements in a more favorable light than you might do yourselves. But yeah, those are the two big takeaways for me, and two big pieces of advice for anyone who's applying to business school right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Nitish, for taking your time. This was a really, really interesting conversation, and all the best with your next journey.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure you'll
I
do well.
appreciate that.
Great.
I have zero doubts about that.
Great. Thank you.
Take care, man.